The Zycran warship floated above the battlefield like a giant metal beast, its dark shape casting a shadow over the dusty ground below. Inside the command center, Commander Xylox stood tall, his golden armor gleaming under the artificial lights. His red eyes scanned the room, watching his elite warriors prepare for battle. Zycrans were known as the strongest fighters in the galaxy. Their muscular bodies, sharp claws, and advanced weapons made them almost unbeatable. No species had ever matched their power. Xylox smirked as he looked at his soldiers. "Today we will crush the enemy like insects," he declared, his voice echoing through the chamber. The warriors roared in agreement. Then the doors hissed open, and silence filled the room. A single soldier stepped inside. Unlike the towering Zycrans, this one was small and thin. His body was covered in a dark combat suit, and his helmet hid his face. His movements were calm, controlled, too quiet for a warrior. Xylox narrowed his eyes. "And who is this?" A Zycran officer stepped forward, looking uncomfortable. "Commander, this is the human soldier assigned to our unit." For a moment, Xylox just stared. Then he laughed, a deep, mocking sound. His warriors joined in, their laughter shaking the walls. "A human." Xylox smirked. "This must be a joke." The human soldier, Captain Daniel Reed, stood still. He didn't react. He didn't flinch. Xylox stepped closer, towering over him. "You expect me to fight beside a weak, fragile human?" He turned to his warriors. "Humans break easily. Their bones snap, their flesh tears, and they don't have the strength to survive real battles." The Zycran soldiers nodded and grinned, enjoying the insult. But Daniel, he just tilted his head slightly. Xylox frowned. There was no fear in this human's eyes. No response. Xylox growled. "Do you not speak, human?" Daniel finally moved. He removed his helmet, revealing short brown hair, sharp blue eyes, and a calm face. His expression was unreadable. Then he said 3 simple words. "I'm ready, Commander." His voice was steady, controlled. No fear, no anger, just pure confidence. Xylox's amusement faded. This human was strange. He didn't act like the weak creatures he had seen before. A Zycran warrior stepped forward, flexing his massive arms. "Let me test him, Commander," he said, cracking his knuckles. "One punch, and he'll be crying for mercy." Xylox chuckled. "Very well. Let's see what happens." The Zycran warrior swung his fist, aiming for Daniel's face. But Daniel moved. Not backward, not to the side. He ducked, just an inch, letting the punch whistle past his head. The Zycran's fist hit nothing but air. The warriors blinked in shock. The Zycran was fast, but this human was faster. Daniel did not attack. He did not react at all. He just stood there, his blue eyes calm, almost bored. Xylox felt a flicker of something unfamiliar, curiosity. "Enough," he said, raising a hand. The Zycran warrior backed away, growling in frustration. Xylox stepped forward until he was face to face with Daniel. "Tell me, human, why are you here?" Daniel met his gaze without hesitation. "To fight." Xylox smirked. "To die, you mean?" Daniel didn't blink. "No, Commander. To win." For a long moment, neither of them moved. The tension in the room grew heavy, like a storm about to break. Then, Xylox turned sharply and barked an order. "Prepare for battle." The Zycran warriors roared and rushed to their stations. Xylox glanced at Daniel one last time before walking away. This human was different, and for the first time in his life, Commander Xylox felt a sliver of doubt. Commander Xylox couldn't shake the feeling of unease. The human, Daniel Reed, had shown no fear, no hesitation, just quiet confidence. It was unnatural. Zycrans were used to dominating weaker species, and humans had never been considered a real threat. So why did this one act like he had nothing to prove? The war alarms blared across the ship. The battle was about to begin. Zycran warriors rushed to their positions, preparing for the assault. The enemy, a brutal race called the Korth-Thuxel, had already begun landing on the battlefield below. Their massive, armored war beasts stomped across the wasteland, shaking the ground with each step. The air was thick with the scent of burning metal and ozone from charged plasma weapons. Xylox turned to his warriors. "This is our moment. We will crush the Korth-Thuxel like insects." His soldiers roared in response, their sharp claws flexing, their weapons humming with power. Then he glanced at Daniel. The human stood apart from the others, securing his gear with careful, practiced movements. Unlike the Zycrans, who relied on brute force and size, Daniel's armor was sleek, lightweight, and efficient. A simple rifle rested at his side, but Xylox knew it wasn't just the weapon that made a soldier dangerous. It was how they used it. "You will fight with us," Xylox said, stepping up to the human. Daniel met his gaze, adjusting the strap on his shoulder. That was the plan. Xylox narrowed his eyes. "Do not slow us down." Daniel gave a small smirk. "I won't." The transport doors slammed open, revealing the battlefield below. Fire and smoke painted the landscape in shades of red and black. The Korth-Thuxel army was already advancing, their monstrous warriors twice the size of Zycrans, covered in spiked exoskeletons that could withstand direct plasma fire. Their war cries were deafening, a mixture of snarls and mechanical screeches from their bio-enhanced armor. The Zycrans leaped from the ship first, landing hard, their impact kicking up dust. They immediately rushed forward, weapons blazing, cutting through the enemy lines. Daniel walked out. No rush, no panic, just calm, measured steps as he surveyed the battlefield. Xylox growled, "This is not the time for sightseeing, human." Daniel didn't respond. Instead, he raised his rifle and fired a single, precise shot. A Korth-Thuxel sniper, hidden atop a burning wreck, collapsed, its head vaporized before it could fire on the Zycrans below. Xylox stopped. He hadn't even seen that sniper. Daniel adjusted his stance and fired again. Another Korth-Thuxel fell, then another. Each shot was perfect, no wasted movement. The human was hunting, not spraying bullets wildly like the others, but choosing his targets carefully. Xylox's grip tightened on his weapon. He had underestimated this human. But the battle was far from over. A massive Korth-Thuxel war beast, nearly 20 feet tall, stomped forward, its thick exoskeleton deflecting Zycran gunfire. Warriors leaped onto it, slashing with their plasma blades, but the creature barely flinched. Its enormous cannon arm charged up, glowing bright with destructive energy. If it fired, it would wipe out half of Xylox's warriors in an instant. Daniel moved. He sprinted forward, faster than Xylox had expected a human to be. In one fluid motion, he pulled a small metallic device from his belt and flung it toward the beast. A sharp, high-pitched whistle filled the air. Then boom. The device detonated, not in a massive explosion, but in a controlled shockwave that sent the war beast staggering backward. For the first time, the monstrous creature hesitated. Xylox's eyes widened. The human hadn't killed it outright. He had disrupted its systems. The beast's exoskeleton flickered, its defensive shielding short-circuited by whatever device Daniel had used. Daniel didn't stop. He leaped onto the beast's back, a small blade appearing in his hand. But it wasn't a traditional Zycran plasma sword. This was something else, something faster, sharper, deadlier. With surgical precision, Daniel drove the blade into the beast's neck joint, cutting through layers of armor and alien flesh like it was paper. The war beast screeched, stumbling before collapsing into the dirt, lifeless. Silence followed. Even the Zycrans had stopped fighting to stare at the human who had just taken down a creature that should have been unstoppable. Xylox felt something he had never felt before toward a human. Respect. Daniel exhaled, flicking the blood off his blade before sliding it back into his armor. He turned to Xylox. "You were saying something about humans being weak." Xylox clenched his jaw. He wanted to argue. He wanted to scoff. But he couldn't. Because for the first time in his life, he had just witnessed something he never thought possible. A human outmatched a Zycran in battle. And the war had just begun. The battlefield was still smoldering, the scent of burning metal and charred flesh hanging thick in the air. The dust had barely settled from the first wave of combat, yet Commander Xylox couldn't shake the image of the human taking down the Korth Sol war beast with such calculated efficiency. The Zycrans were ruthless warriors, bred for war, but this human, he fought differently. He fought like he had already won. Xylox had no time to dwell on it. The war wasn't over, and the Korth Sol never retreated easily. Their forces were regrouping beyond the jagged cliffs, preparing for another strike. This time, their numbers were overwhelming. Zycran warriors gathered near the ridge, their sharp, reptilian eyes scanning the landscape below. Some whispered among themselves about what they had just witnessed. The human, Daniel Reed, had shifted the tide of battle in a way they hadn't expected. But was it luck, or something else? Xylox turned to Daniel, who was calmly reloading his rifle, his expression unreadable. "You should have told me you had combat experience like that," Xylox said, his voice edged with irritation. Daniel barely looked up. "You didn't ask." Xylox clenched his teeth. Zycrans were used to dominance, to being the superior force in every war. Yet this human had been holding back. That was unsettling. "Do you realize what you've done?" Xylox continued, stepping closer. "You exposed our weaknesses." Daniel snapped his rifle shut with a quiet click. "I exposed your weaknesses. There's a difference." Xylox's fists clenched. No one talked to him like that. No one. Before he could respond, the ground beneath them trembled. A deep, guttural rumble echoed across the valley, sending shockwaves through the cliffs. The Zycrans tensed, their weapons raised. Even Daniel's gaze sharpened. Then they saw it. From the distant horizon, a monstrous shadow emerged, something far larger than anything they had encountered before. The Korth Sol siege engine. A towering behemoth of war, standing nearly 100 feet tall, its metallic exoskeleton gleaming under the storm-lit sky. Its 6 massive legs crushed the ground beneath it, leaving deep craters with every step. Its front was lined with plasma turrets, each capable of reducing entire squads to ashes in mere seconds. And atop its hulking frame, a massive cannon was charging, glowing a menacing shade of crimson. Xylox's blood ran cold. That weapon wasn't meant for infantry. It was meant for erasing armies. The Zycran forces faltered. Their bravado had carried them through countless battles. But this was death marching toward them. One of the warriors turned to Xylox, his voice shaking. "Commander, our weapons can't penetrate that armor. If it fires..." "I know," Xylox growled, his mind racing. He had fought countless wars, but even he didn't have an immediate answer to this. They were outgunned, outmatched. Then he heard a voice, calm, unshaken. "I've taken down bigger," Daniel said. Xylox turned sharply. "You can't be serious." Daniel was already moving, pulling a small holographic device from his belt. With a quick motion, he activated it, revealing a complex 3-dimensional map of the battlefield. The siege engine's weak points flashed in red, tiny vulnerabilities that Zycran scanners had completely missed. Xylox's eyes widened. "How does it matter?" Daniel interrupted. He pointed at a joint near the engine's hind leg. "Right here. This is where we hit." Xylox hesitated, taking orders from a human. Unthinkable. But they were out of options. The human turned to him, his expression unreadable. "You want to win this war, or not?" Xylox's pride burned, but he nodded. "What's the plan?" Daniel smirked. Moments later, the Zycrans moved like they had never moved before. Following the human's precise attack formation, they split into small, agile strike teams, darting between the wreckage and staying out of sight. Daniel led one of the groups himself, moving with an almost unnatural precision, his every step calculated. The siege engine continued its slow march forward, its cannon still charging. They were running out of time. Daniel sprinted ahead, his rifle slung across his back. Instead of firing, he pulled out a compact explosive device no larger than his palm. He motioned for Xylox's warriors to cover him. The Zykrans watched in stunned silence as the human climbed the enemy war machine, his movements swift and controlled. Laser fire erupted around him, scorching the metal, but Daniel did not stop. He leaped onto the siege engine's massive leg, gripping onto a small panel just above the joint. Then, in one precise motion, he planted the explosive and kicked off the machine, landing hard on the ground just as the countdown began. 5 seconds. Xylox barely had time to react before Daniel grabbed him and dragged him behind cover. 3 seconds. The Korthsal, realizing the danger, began shouting in their guttural tongue, scrambling to shut down the system. 2 seconds. Xylox could see the siege engine's massive cannon beginning to glow with unstable energy. 1. Then, boom. A massive chain reaction tore through the machine's core. The explosion ripped through its legs, sending the behemoth crashing into the ground with a deafening roar. Its cannon overloaded, firing wildly into the sky before detonating in a massive fireball that lit up the entire battlefield. The shockwave sent dust and debris flying for miles. And then, silence. The invincible war machine lay in ruins. Xylox struggled to his feet, staring in disbelief. His warriors, still frozen in shock, turned to the only figure still standing confidently in the aftermath. Daniel Reed. The human dusted himself off, adjusted his rifle, and turned back toward the Zykran commander. "I told you," he said. "I've taken down bigger." Xylox didn't speak, because for the first time in his life, he realized something terrifying. The strongest warrior on this battlefield wasn't a Zykran. It was a human. The battlefield still smoldered with the remnants of the fallen war machine. Shattered metal and scorched ground bore witness to the destruction Daniel had unleashed. The once invincible siege engine, a towering testament to Korthsal's superiority, was now nothing more than twisted wreckage. And yet, the war was far from over. Xylox stood in stunned silence, his sharp eyes fixed on the human. The Zykran warriors around him exchanged uneasy glances. The destruction of the siege engine should have filled them with triumph, but instead, it left them questioning everything. This human, he had done the impossible. Daniel Reed had single-handedly turned the tide of battle, not with brute force, but with strategy, precision, and a fearlessness that defied reason. He was unlike any soldier Xylox had ever encountered, Zykran or otherwise. And that made him dangerous. Xylox stepped forward, his voice firm. "How did you know?" Daniel, still checking his rifle's ammo, glanced up. "Know what?" "The weakness in the siege engine." Daniel smirked. "I pay attention." Xylox narrowed his eyes. That wasn't an answer. Before he could push further, a Zykran scout rushed toward them, breathless. "Commander, the Korthsal. They are not retreating." Xylox's jaw tightened. "Impossible. We destroyed their strongest weapon." They anticipated the loss. The scout's voice was grim. "They have another force, twice as large, moving in from the eastern ridge. They'll be here in less than an hour." A hush fell over the Zykran ranks. If what the scout said was true, then the battle they had just fought was nothing but a test. The real war was about to begin. Xylox turned back to Daniel. "Tell me, human, do you still think we can win this?" Daniel didn't hesitate. "We don't have a choice." Xylox studied him for a long moment. The human was unreadable, but there was no fear in his expression, only resolve. The Zykran commander let out a slow breath. "Then we prepare." The war camp was a flurry of movement. Zykran warriors reinforced their defensive lines, loading plasma weapons and positioning heavy artillery. The wounded were pulled back to the med stations, while engineers scrambled to set up energy shields around the perimeter. In the midst of it all, Daniel stood apart. He wasn't just following orders, he was giving them. Xylox watched in silence as the human moved through the camp, correcting mistakes, adjusting formations, and pointing out vulnerabilities the Zykrans hadn't even noticed. And the worst part? His warriors listened. At first, they had resisted, scoffing at the idea of taking direction from an outsider. But after seeing him in battle, after watching him destroy a war machine that should have been unstoppable, they had no choice but to respect him. And now, they followed him without question. Xylox clenched his fists. This human was more than just a soldier. He was a leader. And that was a problem. Night fell. The air was thick with tension as the Zykran forces stood at the ready, watching the horizon. The enemy would strike soon. Daniel sat alone near the edge of the camp, his eyes fixed on the distance. Xylox approached, stopping a few feet away. "You're different," the Zykran commander said. Daniel didn't look at him. "I get that a lot. I don't trust you." Xylox's voice was quiet but firm. "And yet my warriors follow you. Even I am forced to admit that your tactics are effective." Daniel let out a small chuckle. "That must really bother you." Xylox's jaw tightened. He wasn't going to deny it. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The wind howled through the valley, carrying the distant echoes of war machines marching toward them. Finally, Xylox asked, "What are you?" Daniel exhaled slowly. "I'm just a soldier." Xylox didn't believe that for a second. But before he could push for more answers, the first explosion rocked the ground beneath them. The attack had begun. The Korthxal came like a tidal wave of destruction. Their armored war beasts charged forward, their eyes glowing with bloodlust. Energy cannons fired, lighting up the night with deadly streaks of plasma. The ground shook beneath the thunderous march of thousands of soldiers. The Zykran warriors braced themselves, weapons raised. This was the moment that would decide everything. Xylox barked orders, rallying his forces into defensive formations. The energy shields held, for now. But under the relentless assault, they wouldn't last long. And then, amidst the chaos, Daniel moved. He wasn't hiding behind cover. He wasn't waiting for the enemy to come to him. He was running straight into the fire. Xylox's breath caught as the human sprinted through the battlefield, dodging blasts with inhuman precision. He was a ghost, slipping between enemy lines like he had done this 1,000 times before. And then, he vanished. Xylox's heart pounded. Where had he gone? For a few agonizing seconds, there was nothing. Just the roar of battle and the screams of the dying. And then, the explosions started. One after another, the Korthxal war machines erupted into flames, their cores detonating from within. Xylox's eyes widened in shock. How? Then he saw him. Daniel emerged from the smoke, a detonator in hand. He had infiltrated the enemy's front lines, planting charges where they were most vulnerable. And he wasn't done yet. With unmatched precision, the human took out the enemy officers, cutting the Korthxal command structure apart. The enemy forces, confused and leaderless, began to collapse. Xylox could hardly believe what he was seeing. One human, one soldier, and he had just won them the war. By dawn, the battlefield was silent. The Korthxal had been routed. Xylox stood atop the ridge, staring at the remnants of the once great enemy army. Victory was theirs, but not because of him. Not because of the Zykrans. Because of one human. He turned to Daniel, who was cleaning his weapon with the same calm indifference as if this had been just another day at war. Xylox exhaled slowly. He had underestimated this human, and now he had only one question left. "What are you really, Daniel Reed?" The human looked up. For the first time, his expression hardened. And then, with a knowing smirk, he answered, "I'm the reason your enemies are afraid of the dark." Smoke still lingered in the air, mixing with the morning fog as the battlefield fell silent. The bodies of fallen Korthsal warriors lay scattered across the charred earth, their war machines reduced to little more than twisted metal and smoldering wreckage. The once mighty invasion force had been broken, not by overwhelming numbers, nor by superior firepower, but by one human soldier. Psylocke stood atop the ridge, watching as his warriors moved through the battlefield, securing what little was left of the enemy. He should have felt triumphant. He should have celebrated this victory. But all he felt was unease. His gaze drifted to the man responsible for this impossible outcome, Daniel Reed. The human sat on a broken piece of enemy armor, methodically cleaning his weapon. He didn't revel in the victory. He didn't boast. He simply prepared, as if another war was already on the horizon. And maybe, for him, it was. Psylocke exhaled sharply. The human was an enigma. He had fought like a man who had nothing to lose, yet his actions had been precise, calculated. He had no rank, no army of his own, yet he had commanded the Zychron warriors as if they were his to lead. And they had followed, not because of orders, not because of duty, because they had seen what he could do. Psylocke knew he could not ignore the truth any longer. This human was dangerous. And now he had to decide what to do about it. The War Council convened in the command tent, its atmosphere thick with tension. Zychron officers sat around a long metallic table, their expressions a mixture of admiration, suspicion, and uncertainty. The victory against the Korthsal had been unprecedented, but none of them could ignore who had delivered it. Daniel sat at the far end, silent, watching. Psylocke finally spoke. The enemy has been routed, but we cannot afford complacency. The Korthsal do not take defeat lightly. They will return. General Vector, a hardened veteran, leaned forward. And when they do, we will be ready. We have seen their tactics, their weaknesses, thanks to the human. His sharp, reptilian eyes shifted to Daniel. But I must ask, Reed, what exactly are you? Daniel sighed, leaning back in his chair. I told you. I'm a soldier. Vector's ridged brow furrowed. You are more than that. His voice was firm, unyielding. You fight like one who has seen far too many wars. You command like one who has led armies. You outmaneuvered an enemy we have been at war with for decades. Psylocke folded his arms. You are not an ordinary human. For a long moment, Daniel said nothing. Then he leaned forward, resting his arms on the table. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it now. You want to know what I am? His gaze swept across the room. I'm the reason the Korthsal will think twice before coming here again. Silence. Then Vector let out a low growl. You speak as if you are the war itself. Daniel tilted his head slightly. Maybe I am. Psylocke felt the weight of those words settle over the room. There was no arrogance in them, no boastfulness, only truth. He knew then that this human was something far more dangerous than a mere soldier. He was a weapon. Later that night, Psylocke found Daniel standing alone at the edge of the encampment, staring at the war-torn valley below. Psylocke approached slowly. You don't sleep. It wasn't a question. Daniel gave a small chuckle. Not much. For a moment, they stood in silence. The wind howled through the cliffs, carrying the faint scent of scorched metal and blood. Finally, Psylocke spoke. You won this war for us. But I wonder, did you ever believe in our cause? Daniel's jaw tightened slightly. I believed in stopping the Korthsal. His voice was quiet. I've seen what they do to the places they conquer. Psylocke studied him. You've fought them before, haven't you? Daniel didn't answer immediately. Then, after a long pause, he said, A long time ago. Psylocke narrowed his eyes. There was something in the human's tone, something deeper than hatred. It was personal. You lost someone. Psylocke guessed. Daniel's gaze remained fixed on the horizon. I lost everything. The Zychron commander felt a strange weight settle in his chest. He had seen warriors who fought for duty, for glory, for power. But Daniel fought for something else. He fought because he had already lost. And that made him more terrifying than any enemy they had ever faced. The next morning, the Zychron scouts returned with dire news. The Korthexol had not retreated. They had regrouped. A new fleet, far larger than the last, was inbound. Warships, carriers, and something else. Something far worse. Psylocke read the report, his stomach twisting. This is impossible. They shouldn't have been able to mobilize this quickly. Daniel, standing at his side, let out a slow breath. They were never planning to retreat. Psylocke's head snapped toward him. What? The human's expression darkened. This was never about conquering your planet. His voice was grim. This was about testing your defenses. The Zychron commander felt a chill crawl down his spine. The Korthexol had never planned to win this war conventionally. They had let them have this victory, because it didn't matter. A new invasion force was coming, and this time there would be no mercy. Psylocke clenched his fists. Then we prepare. Daniel shook his head. No. His voice was cold, unwavering. We don't wait for them. He turned to Psylocke, eyes filled with something the Zychron had never seen before. Ruthlessness. We take the fight to them. The war drums of the Korthexol fleet echoed across the vastness of space. Their massive warships, built for planetary annihilation, hovered like dark gods above the Zychron homeworld, blocking out the stars. The invasion had been inevitable. The only question had been when. Now, the answer hung in the cold void. They were here. Psylocke stood in the central war room, surrounded by his top commanders. Holograms of enemy fleet movements flickered in the dimly lit chamber. The Korthexol forces dwarfed their own. Triple the numbers. Superior firepower. A planet-killer ship at the heart of their formation. Defeat was all but certain. Yet, the human stood at the table, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Daniel Reed didn't see a lost cause. He saw an opportunity. Psylocke cleared his throat. We cannot repel an assault of this scale. Our defenses. We're not repelling it. Daniel's voice cut through the room like a blade. We're ending it. General Vector frowned. Do you have some kind of strategy, human? Or do you simply not understand the concept of impossible? Daniel exhaled, stepping forward. I understand impossible just fine. But I also understand something your people don't. Psylocke raised a brow. And that is. Daniel reached forward, pressing a few buttons on the holo display. The enemy fleet shifted, zooming in on the planet-killer ship. You're fighting a war. But these bastards. Daniel's jaw tightened. They're fighting an extermination. Silence fell over the room. Psylocke's eyes narrowed. Explain. Daniel tapped the image of the massive enemy warship. The Korthexol aren't just here to win. They're here to make an example of your planet, to burn it so thoroughly that no one in this galaxy ever challenges them again. Vector's claws flexed. And what do you propose we do? Daniel's expression darkened. We take that planet killer off the board. A murmur rippled through the room. Psylocke folded his arms. That ship is the size of a small moon. Heavily armored. Shielded. It has entire legions of warriors inside. You expect us to simply destroy it. Daniel smiled. No, he said. I expect us to steal it. A day later, the Zychron war fleet gathered in low orbit, prepared for what would be the most daring assault in their history. The plan was madness. A direct infiltration. While the Zychron forces engaged the Korthexol in a feint, a small team, led by Daniel, would board the planet killer itself. Their objective: disable its shields and turn its firepower against the rest of the fleet. It was a plan so reckless, so audacious, that no Zychron commander would have dared suggest it. But Daniel was not Zychron. He was human, and humans had a habit of doing the impossible. The infiltration team launched under the cover of the first wave. Daniel, Xylox, and a handful of elite Zycran warriors piloted a stealth dropship through the chaos of battle. Fighters streaked across the void, plasma blasts illuminating the darkness like distant supernovas. The distraction was working, at least for now. Inside the dropship, the tension was thick. Xylox tightened the straps of his armor. If this fails, it won't. Daniel cut him off, checking his weapon. You're thinking like a commander. Start thinking like a soldier. Xylox scowled but said nothing. The dropship shuddered as it latched onto the underbelly of the colossal warship. With a hiss of decompression, the hatch opened. Darkness loomed before them. Daniel was the first to step inside. The corridors of the planet Killer were eerily silent, save for the distant hum of machinery. The team moved in formation, weapons raised, their steps measured. They had 10 minutes before the Corthexol realized they were aboard. Daniel led the way, scanning the layout. He had memorized the schematics from the stolen battle plans. Their first objective was the central reactor, the heart of the ship. Take that out, and the shields would drop. They moved swiftly through the hallways, taking out patrols with brutal efficiency. Silent kills. No alarms. But then, a deep guttural snarl. Xylox barely had time to react before a massive Corthexol warrior rounded the corner, its glowing red eyes locking onto them. It roared, raising a heavy plasma axe. Alarms blared. So much for stealth. Move E, Daniel shouted, firing first. His rifle barked, blue plasma rounds tearing into the alien's armor. The hallway erupted into chaos. More Corthexol soldiers poured in from both sides, weapons blazing. The Zycran warriors fought with ruthless precision, but they were outnumbered. They needed to move. Fast. Daniel grabbed a fallen enemy's grenade and hurled it down the corridor. A blinding explosion sent bodies flying. Go. Go, he barked, shoving Xylox forward. They sprinted through the corridors, cutting down anything in their way. The reactor was close, just ahead. But so was something else. As they reached the massive doors leading to the ship's core, they heard it. A slow, heavy thud. Then another. Then another. Xylox's blood ran cold. The Corthexol had unleashed their champion. The doors blasted open, revealing a monster. 10 feet tall, clad in gleaming obsidian armor. Its eyes burned like molten suns. It carried a warhammer the size of a starfighter's engine. Daniel barely had time to swear before the beast charged. The impact shattered the floor beneath them. Daniel rolled, narrowly avoiding the champion's hammer as it caved in the steel where he had stood a second before. The monster moved fast, too fast for something its size. Daniel fired, but the beast's armor absorbed the shots. It swung again, this time at Xylox. The Zycran barely managed to block with his blade, but the force sent him crashing into the wall. Daniel gritted his teeth. This wasn't a fight they could win head-on. So they wouldn't. They would outsmart it. He glanced at the reactor. Massive coolant pipes snaked across the walls. An idea sparked. He dived toward the control panel, dodging another hammer swing. His fingers flew across the interface. The reactor's safety locks disengage. Xylox's eyes widened. What are you doing? Daniel grinned. Ending this. The coolant systems ruptured. Superheated gas erupted into the chamber, engulfing the champion in a storm of burning mist. It roared, a deafening, inhuman sound, stumbling as its armor melted in the inferno. Daniel didn't hesitate. He raised his weapon and fired. The plasma round struck dead center. The champion let out a final, gurgling snarl, then collapsed. The reactor hummed as the shields dropped. Daniel exhaled, turning to Xylox. Time to take this ship. The moment the reactor's shields dropped, the battle outside shifted. Zycran warships, once desperately outmatched, now surged forward with renewed fury. The planet Killer was vulnerable. But the fight inside was far from over. Daniel barely had a second to breathe before the ship's AI system reacted. A deep mechanical voice echoed through the chamber. Intrusion detected. Deploying final security measures. Heavy blast doors slammed shut, sealing them inside. The floor rumbled, and from the walls, massive storage units slid open. Inside them stood the Praetorians. 7-foot-tall Korthsal enforcers, genetically enhanced, clad in black, reinforced exo-armor. Their movements were unnatural, too precise, as if part machine, part beast. Their weapons crackled with blue energy, designed to cut through any known armor in the galaxy. Xylox cursed under his breath. We just killed their champion, and now they send these. Daniel reloaded his weapon, eyes locked onto the enemies. They're angry. He smirked. Good. The Praetorians moved as one, storming toward them with terrifying speed. Daniel didn't hesitate. He darted forward, ducking under the first soldier's blade and planting 2 plasma rounds into its visor. The helmet cracked, but the creature didn't stop. It swung. Daniel barely managed to dodge as the energy blade sliced through the steel wall behind him like butter. Xylox, moving with practiced skill, parried another attacker with his twin daggers. The blades clashed, sending sparks flying. The Zychron warriors fought with precision, but the Praetorians weren't ordinary soldiers. They absorbed damage, adapted, and countered with brutal efficiency. One grabbed a Zychron fighter by the throat and snapped his neck as if he were nothing. Daniel saw it happen, but he couldn't afford to stop. He had one advantage. These things fought like machines. But humans were unpredictable. Daniel suddenly dropped to the ground, sliding between a Praetorian's legs. As it turned in confusion, he grabbed an energy baton from his belt, activated it, and slammed it into the base of its skull. The Praetorian jerked, its body seizing up as the energy short-circuited its neural pathways. Daniel rolled away just as another swung at him. Xylox took the opportunity. He leaped onto the stunned Praetorian's back, driving his dagger deep into the exposed wiring of its suit. The creature collapsed. 1 down. 5 to go. The battle was chaos. Xylox fought with precision, dodging and striking at weak points, while Daniel relied on speed, instinct, and sheer brutality. One Praetorian grabbed Daniel by the arm. He twisted, using its own momentum to flip over its back and plant a grenade on its power core. Boom! The explosion sent Daniel flying, but the Praetorian was gone. 3 left. The Zychron warriors were down to just Xylox and 2 others. Too many losses. Daniel gritted his teeth. They were running out of time. Then, the emergency alarms changed tone. A new voice echoed through the chamber. Self-destruct sequence activated. 5 minutes until detonation. Daniel's blood ran cold. Did you do that? Xylox panted, backing away from a Praetorian. Daniel shook his head. No. They exchanged a look. The Korthsal weren't trying to win this battle anymore. They were trying to take everyone down with them. The last 3 Praetorians didn't hesitate. They charged, no longer concerned with strategy, just pure destruction. Daniel reacted first. He vaulted onto the nearest control console, kicking off and twisting midair, landing on a Praetorian's shoulders. Before it could react, he jammed a plasma blade into the gap between its armor plates. A horrible screech. The Praetorian staggered, then collapsed. 2 left. Xylox and his last remaining soldier tackled one together, pinning it down and stabbing relentlessly. That left the last one. It turned toward Daniel. But Daniel was already moving. He grabbed a fallen Zychron's plasma lance, activated it, and threw it like a spear. The lance pierced straight through the Praetorian's chest. Silence. Then, it fell. They had won, but there was no time to celebrate. The countdown continued. 3 minutes. Daniel sprinted to the control panel, scanning the system. The self-destruct wasn't just for this ship. It was linked to the entire Korthsal fleet. A dead man's switch. Xylox looked at him. Can you stop it? Daniel didn't answer. His mind raced. He couldn't stop it, but he could redirect it. His fingers flew across the controls. The Korthxel commanders had set the detonation sequence to erase all evidence of their defeat. What if? Instead of stopping the explosion, he forced it to target only Korthxel ships. Daniel's eyes flashed with realization. He accessed the targeting parameters, rerouting the command pathways. If he could make the system believe the Zychron ships were friendly, while marking all Korthxel vessels as hostile, he typed furiously, overriding safeties, bypassing security codes. The countdown hit 1 minute. Xylox was breathing hard. Daniel. Almost there. 30 seconds. Daniel hit the final command. The alarm changed. The system accepted the new parameters. A new countdown appeared. 20 seconds. Daniel grabbed Xylox by the arm. We need to run. The team sprinted through the corridors, dodging fallen bodies and sparking machinery. They reached the hangar, where a single Zychron dropship remained. They leaped inside as the ship's engines roared to life. 5 seconds. 4. 3. The dropship blasted out of the hangar, speeding away at maximum thrust. Behind them, the planet killer erupted. A chain reaction ripped through the Korthxel fleet. One by one, their warships detonated, engulfed in blinding explosions. The mighty fleet that once ruled the stars was gone. Daniel leaned back in his seat, breathing heavily. Xylox stared at the destruction in awe. You did it. Daniel let out a tired chuckle. Told you we'd end this. The Zychron fleet, once doomed, now soared victorious. The battle was over. And for the first time in history, the Korthxel had lost.